Just a few moments ago, reporter Nick Harper told us about how women and girls are vulnerable in wars, but they're not the only ones. The deaf and blind face obstacles, and advocates say more must be done to help protect their rights. Joining us live from New York is Shantha Rau Barriga. She is director of the Disability Rights Program at Human Rights Watch. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's talk about conflicts. You know, we just heard from Nick Harper talking about Syria, but of course, Ukraine in the news, Iraq, and there are many other hot spots around the world. People often talk about these vulnerable populations, the elderly, children, women, girls, but there isn't much discussion about this demographic. Are deaf and blind more vulnerable than other populations, would you say?
Well, thank you for having me here today. It's absolutely true that people with disabilities in general are very often invisible in conflicts. We're seeing it in Central African Republic and in Syria and a number of conflicts around the world, that the attention is just not given to this population, yet they are particularly vulnerable because they are not able to flee if they have physical disabilities or if they're blind. They may not hear gunshots if they're deaf, and then they often face abuses. We did work in Uganda on this very issue and looked at and met women with disabilities, a woman who was blind, who was mutilated and burned because she could not identify the neighbors to the rebel groups. We met a deaf woman who was not able to hear the rebels coming and therefore was a victim of violence. And this is true in many conflicts around the world.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. What should countries be doing to protect and improve the lives of people who are blind and deaf?
There are a number of things that governments should be doing in order to really respect the rights of people with disabilities, particularly those who are blind and deaf. They have the same rights as any other person. And education is really at the core of those rights. Without an education, it's difficult to get a job. It's difficult to be a part of the community, to have relationships with others, and learn how to communicate first and foremost when it comes to deaf people in particular. And that's why we really stress education in sign language for that population.
Well, you were talking about sign language. I've read where it's about 1% to 2% of the world's deaf population actually learn sign language. I know you produced this video. We're actually looking at it right now. And in it, one of the participants in the video said, our disability only affects our hearing and not our minds. A deaf child's mind is as good as a hearing child's mind. And yet there is a stigma, isn't there?
Absolutely. There's a lot of stigma when it comes to deafness. We actually met a mother in Uganda who told us how the neighbors didn't want to play with their children because there was a sense that those children would pass on deafness to their neighbor's family. And so there's a lot of stigma about deaf people, and that's why it's so important that they get educated. It's important that they get educated in sign language because it's really a means of communication and it's a means to learn skills. And without that communication and able to be a part of the community, they'll remain isolated.
Shantha, thanks so much for talking about this very important subject. Certainly appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.